hear their excitement. This small group from Durham is aimed to keep kids away from drugs, gangs, and engaged in school.
I love the group. I really am glad that I joined it.
11-year-old Joshua from Eno Valley Elementary says the We Are Kings program for boys of color is teaching him valuable lessons.
I can make a difference in my community. I could stand out. I could be different. I could be better.
A word that resonates every time they recite the King's Creed.
I just get so excited because this is just the beginning.
Jermaine Porter leads the program that boasts 600 boys. This school year, he launched the We Are Kings program in 15 of DPS's elementary, middle, and high schools. Black and brown boys make up 40% of Durham Public Schools' student population. This group's effort is to reduce the achievement gap, school-to-prison pipeline, boost literacy, and motivate students like Braden Keith to be leaders.
The most important way of the Kings is how you carry yourself.
Today, the students visited the International Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro, where they learned about the national sit-in movement, first started here by 4 black men at A&T.
Why is this important?
I think it's important for our future, right? So especially we're here at the International Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro. The students are understanding where they come from. They are our future.
It made me feel like I was actually really there at the time watching it, and it was just a great experience, just knowing your history and what they had to go through in order for segregation to stop.
We Are Kings hopes to be a model for other school districts.
I feel like it made a difference in my life, and it could make a difference in everyone else's.
Tim Pulliam, ABC 11 Eyewitness News.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the second installment of King's Conversations. I'm so excited to have everyone joining us today. My name is Jermaine Porter. I'm the Boys of Color Initiative Coordinator for Durham Public Schools, and I'm super excited to have each and every one of you here with us.
Yes, once again, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Daniel Kelvin Bullock, and I'm the Executive Director for Equity Affairs for Durham Public Schools.
So we're super excited to introduce our guest, Dr. Bullock. I'll introduce the first one and you take care of the second one for us. This young man was actually today, matter of fact, it was today, ABC 11 spotlighted him for Black History Month. He is a franchisee. That means he owns it. He got his own thing. Y'all give it up for Ephraim Yates. He is the franchisee for Your Pie Pizza.
Hey, how you doing tonight, guys? Appreciate you having me.
Ephraim, thank you so much for just joining us. You know, you're a local legend. We're just glad to have you.
Local legend.
Office of Equity Affairs, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Listen, thank you, guys.
Definitely. Oh, and
no,
also, okay, and also joining us, we have DPS alumni, Riverside High School specifically, Mr. Axel Herrera. He is joining us. He is not only a DPS alumni, but he is now alumni of Duke University. And so, Axel, thanks for joining us. And Axel, you are muted, but that's okay because you're going to unmute and you're going to say whatever it is you just said.
This is the time we live in. My pleasure. Great to represent Durham. Great to represent Riverside. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Before we get started, we want to make sure we give everybody the opportunity to follow you guys on your social media platforms. First, we'd like to give out Ephraim Yates. Ephraim's Instagram is real simple, Your Pie NC, right? So check Ephraim out at your Instagram, at Your Pie NC. If you want to check out Axel, make sure you go check him out on Instagram as well as Axel.hr. Thank you guys so much. Once again for joining us. We're super excited to have you guys here with us. For those of you who are watching, you're live with the Office of Equity Affairs. We want to make sure you share your comment, right? Anything you want to ask these young men for the time that we have them here with us, go ahead and put it in your comments, right? And throughout the session, conversation, we will make sure we shout out all of the Kings programs. So make sure if you in the building, that you put it in the comments, that you in the building, so we can let everyone know that you guys are here with us. Make sure you like, share, comment. If you're with us on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe.
All right, and without further ado, we're going to jump right into our discussion this evening. Again, just to give a little background. So we have Mr. Porter started our We Are Kings programs in 2019-20. And during that school year, this program was started as an opportunity for young boys of color to come together, have their identities affirmed, and also to help them develop leadership skills and become advocates for more equitable practices and policies in their schools. So, you know, with the King's Conversations program that we premiered last month, this is an opportunity for us to speak with men of color who have gone through educational systems and have been able to achieve levels of success beyond high school, and just to bring men back to speak with our young men about the strategies, the things that help them to be successful, the systems that help them to be successful, because ultimately we want to build a school system that is going to be the most beneficial for our students that it can possibly be. And so with that in mind, I'd like for Ephraim and Axel to tell us a little bit about themselves. Let's see, Axel, we'll start with you. Tell us about yourself and explain why you agreed to participate in this conversation this evening.
Sure, thank you. I'll try to be brief because I know we'll have many other questions. First and foremost, I am an immigrant. I was born in Honduras and I was raised in the South here in North Carolina for most of my life. Durham is essentially home for the past 7 or 8 years. I attended Riverside and I graduated in 2016. And then I went, stayed here in Durham and went to Duke University, and I graduated this past year, so not too long ago, with a degree in economics. Right now, I'm actually working within a school system. I'm working with the College Advising Corps in Sampson County, North Carolina. So I'm hugely invested in, trying to join this conversation on, coming in as a community to confront obstacles and try to define what success means for us and what the success means for our own community. As an immigrant, I care deeply about what justice, fairness, and opportunity means for a lot of us. And many times it's been through service, it's been through advocacy that I've actually been able to participate in that. And I also believe that as an organizer, people can be empowered, right? Just like we're talking about, owning your own business, starting your organization, starting your own movement. That empowerment is important, right? And I really wish that, through this program, through my experience, through the experience of others in here, we can talk about that. So that's why I came here.
All right, thank you. Ephraim, same question. Tell us about yourself and let us know why you agreed to participate this evening.
Well, first, I am a North Carolina native. I'm from a small town called Kinston. Small town, Eastern North Carolina, about 20,000 people. And so that kind of sums it up. It's an area that like a lot of the kind of socioeconomic disadvantages areas in North Carolina, a lot of crime, a lot of, I grew up in Section 8 housing, right? And so when I get an opportunity to participate in conversations like this, I always jump at it, because when I was younger, it's like this, outside of maybe the Boys and Girls Club, weren't readily available. And so for me, I always love being able to talk to kids and talk to young people, because I so many times wish I had someone extend that hand out to me. And so, I'm a UNC alumni, so I don't know if you guys had something going on. I feel like they set that up, actually. They tried to start something between UNC and Duke, but I ain't gonna
They
say.
had to.
But
No, we're here together though.
but I'm a Tar Heel, and so I'm happy to be here with you guys, and I just look forward to contributing to the conversation anywhere I can.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to take too many personal liberties with that. You're from Kinston, I'm from Wilson, so I'm down the street, and I'm a UNC alumni too. But
Right.
it is good to have both of you here. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you guys are talking about the colleges and universities that you attended. I would be remiss if I did not talk about the number one in the United States. That's North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. North
He said the whole name.
Right?
Absolutely. It's only right. It's only right. It's only right. North Carolina A&T, Aggie pride to all my Aggies that are out there. But
Yes,
we're going to go ahead and get in this, but I need to shout out the Kings that are in the building. They're having viewing parties at certain schools where all the Kings have decided to get on jump on one link with their coordinator.
Awesome.
So Eno Valley Kings, we appreciate you guys joining us. We have the Watts, George Watts, they're the Kings. They're joining us. Riverside High School Kings are joining us. We also have the Kings from Glenn Elementary. Someone in the chat said that they love Ephraim Yates and his crew and all these things. So we're just super excited to have everybody who's joining us. We also have the Young Men of Excellence from the Charles Hamilton Houston Foundation joining us as well. But we want to talk to you guys and get to know a little bit. Do you remember the first teacher that really showed you they cared, that they cared for you and supported you? What grade were you in, and how did they show you they cared, right? So do you remember the first teacher that really showed you that they cared for you, supported you? What grade were you in, and how did they show you they cared? Axel, we'll let you go first. Looks like you're chopping at the bit.
Oh man, I was hoping that Ephraim went first, but it's a hard question, to be honest. It's a hard question because, to be honest, I've been very fortunate that when I was thinking about this question, I was like, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that have supported me, starting in second grade with honestly the person who helped me, the ESL teacher, to, middle school, someone who inspired me to, actually enjoy my classes. But if I were to say a couple names, I'm gonna give a couple, I'm gonna cheat. There's one teacher, my sophomore year of high school, who I guess identified that I had a potential to lead. And I think that started a trajectory for my involvement and my advocacy that I don't think I anticipated. I don't think I was planning, as a 10th grader in high school. And that is Mr. Campos, Fernando Campos. He was one of my Spanish teachers, and he sat me down one semester and said, what do you want to do? What are you trying to do? And he asked me to join an organization which was in Riverside, Destino Success, to get involved and to help out, right? There was a lot of need with new unaccompanied minors that were coming to Riverside. And from that, my second shout out, which is a huge support, was Miss Ellen Holmes from Riverside, who fought tooth and nail to support us in everything we did and really kind of showed that level of service that now, I aspire to keep having with the students I'm working.
All right. Thank you. Ephraim, your same question. First time an educator, really showed they cared for you, and how did they do it?
So I think that is always a really interesting question because, one thing about that we all know is that there really is no sort of moment, right? There's all these micro moments that happen in your life that really sort of get you to this point where you are. But, I feel like there wasn't one specific teacher, but I had a lot of good teachers whose classes I enjoyed. And one of the things I I feel like, especially like with brown boys, right? We don't always have someone who goes out of their way, like a sort of like We Are Kings are doing, right? So while I was always a good student, you know, I made good grades. So I probably was the student when you're in a kind of community where class sizes are probably a little too big and the teacher probably has more students in there than she should. The good students, sometimes you slip through the cracks because you're the kid that the teacher doesn't have to worry about, right? Because her plate is already so full. So I feel like a lot of my sort of grade school experience was that way because I was the easy kid, right? I was the nerd. I always got good grades. But I will say there was one guidance counselor in 10th grade. It was the beginning of 10th grade, and I'll actually never forget this. First day, first week of school in homeroom, transcripts. And I don't know if they did that when you were in school, but you find out what your class rank is. The transcript from your freshman year. And I got really good grades, but when I saw my transcript, I was really disappointed at where I was ranked in my class. And I didn't understand it because I was like, wait a minute, I have A's, but like this person is higher than me. And I'm like, it's not making sense. And so I actually remember after that homeroom class, beelining it to my guidance counselor. And I told her to make this make sense for me. I'm like, how am I getting these grades, but I'm here? And she took the opportunity to explain to me like taking honors courses and how weighted credit works, right? And so when she explained that to me, her name was Mrs. Yarborough. And when she explained that to me, in that moment, I said, change my schedule now, right? So she, in that moment, that was like, I mean, I don't know why as a 10th grader, but she changed my whole class schedule in that moment and put me in all honors courses, right? And so that changed, that was really sort of an impactful moment because from there, I was able to continue making good grades. And by the time it was time to apply to college, I was top 5% in my high school class. But it was that moment where she really thought enough to say, hey, this kid's serious. You know, I was really emotional about it, even in tears. And she thought enough to actually explain to me how it works and actually help me do something about it. So if I had to say, you know, one person that really sort of stands out that was instrumental, it would be her for that reason, you know?
I found myself in the summers trying to get my schedules changed a lot. So yeah. I feel you on that.
But that's why these programs are so important, right? Like people like you, Dr. Bullock, who can take these kids and understand like, hey, if you want to get into a great school like Duke, you got to take these sorts of classes because you're competing with the kids who are in these classes. Whereas you come from a neighborhood like I come from, no one's explaining that to you, right? Like, just happy that you didn't drop out of school, right? And so if you're actually trying to, but like you guys are actually giving these kids and skills and letting them know very early on, like this is what it's going to take to kind of make an impact and do something, right? So I think this is what's so awesome about this program.
Ephraim, you touched on something that I thought was important in what you were sharing about how oftentimes if you aren't a troublemaker in class, you fall through the cracks of receiving some type of resources or care to a certain extent because the teachers' plates are full, right? And one thing about the program, the We Are Kings program, there isn't an ideal student.
Right.
We Are Kings program, right? It is a range of students. We want the students who are achieving and the students who skip it. We want those who are slipping through the cracks, and we want those that are breaking the wall down, right? So the thing about it is we've got to figure out or try to get to let our teachers understand that those students who are doing what they're supposed to do, who are turning in comments on time, they still need to be cared for and not just necessarily allow them to fall through the cracks.
Right. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Dr.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, I mean, y'all said so much there that I wish we could unpack a little more. One, y'all spoke to the different roles of educators in the building. Like Axel referred to ESL teacher, Spanish teacher, like teachers teaching different subjects, and then you bring up the counselor. Like, so it doesn't even necessarily have to be. Sometimes when we think of school, we think of these core subject areas. It's math, science, history, English language arts, etc. But one, you're talking to different types of subject areas, different types of support, and it's not always about having an adult who's necessarily in a classroom care for you, but
Absolutely.
any adult in the building that's willing to show that care that can really help you, to get to where you want to be. In thinking, so our next question is around this idea of, boys of color and being themselves. And so I guess the question is, so do you think it's difficult for boys and men of color to be themselves, their essential selves, to remain who they truly are? And let's put it in a school context, in the educational context. And so what are your thoughts about that? Is that difficult for young men to do? Actually, you know what? I'm thinking in a school context, but you could also take this professionally. Like, for boys and men of color to be themselves in different places, why or why not? And just say a little bit about your thoughts on that question.
Axel, you want me to go first this time?
Big question.
So I'll be honest and say that I think it's extremely difficult for boys and men of color to be themselves, right? If you just think about Du Bois and his whole double consciousness, right? How we have to be able to operate in two worlds. And, if you're like myself, I grew up in the housing projects, and with that, I saw everything that comes with being in that environment, right? From family members being killed, to family members being locked up, to friends being arrested, friends being, all of this stuff, right? And so how you bring that trauma with you, right? And so you have to then go into a classroom, and I happen to be one of the really smart kids, and growing up, I had friends from my neighborhood who we were really close together. And there were times when, as I started focusing more on school and they started maybe focusing more on other things, that we heads a little bit, right? Because now, just like some of probably the Kings and young men in your program, now their friends think, oh, think you better than us, or when really it's just like, man, I'm trying to make it out. Like, I don't want to get shot like my cousin got shot, right? Like, my cousin was killed when he was 19, or I don't want to slip through the cracks and something happened to me. And for me, I see school as a way out. Like, this is my life raft, right? So I think it's extremely difficult to bring all of that into an academic setting. And there's the code switching, right? Like, everyone has their telephone boys or their school boys, or when they're on a job interview. But like, when you're with your homies, you still gotta be able to be and exist in that environment, right? Because if you can't do that, if you can't hold your own, you're easy pickings, right? Like, you gotta really be able to manage that. And so you can still be a straight A student, but you got to go back home. And I got to be able to go to the grocery store, go to the corner store where my mom sends me to do something. And that takes a different type of mindset and a different type of way that you have to manage and carry yourself. So I would say, yeah, you really do, but you can't put that on full display in a school setting, right? How do you do that, right? So you got to learn that. And I think even at the age that your young men are, they're fluent in that language, right? They know how to code switch, and they do it without even thinking, because their environment, their survival demands that they learn how to do that, right?
Yeah.
Axel?
That's so interesting. I think there's probably a similar interpretation that I take from that question, and it's more of, I definitely think boys of color get defined in terms of restricted, but I think the way that restriction happens is kind of odd, because it's more of what you're supposed to end up as, or what you're supposed to end up becoming. And my struggle, and I can share a little story about this, was how it was always internalized in some ways. And I would always almost hear it from peers than maybe like another educator, right? And then now in hindsight, there's so many like structural things of how classes worked, how segregated the honors or AP classes were working, that Ephraim like shares, you know, being, I would say almost the lucky student, right? Who was able to succeed in some ways. And I always found myself being one of the few of those students. And I credit a lot of that to some of those educators that helped me get to that point, right? That kind of identified me at some point and said like, hey, you should do this. But the majority of, especially in high school, of the students that I was working with, they were like, passing was the default, was the expectation. Succeeding was either weird, odd, different. I was once told, is like, if you're smart, how come you live in the hood? I was like, I mean, those two things aren't like mutually exclusive, right? I think so. Like how success is defined as something that we don't necessarily have, or we aren't supposed to achieve, or how, you know, I guess how schools define intelligence, it doesn't include us, is something that really bothered me, kind of like, especially in the high school setting, as I was trying to be like, hey, I'm just trying to, you know, I actually, you know, we have a competitive nature in many ways, especially like young boys. But whenever it's academic, it didn't make sense, right? In sports and other things, yes, be competitive, but in trying to succeed and trying to better, it was different. But I was fortunate to work with a program similar to the We Are Kings program, which was Dr. Bullock's familiar with it, the Boost program, which is a STEM program for middle schoolers of underrepresented minorities. And, you know, working in that setting was one of the most rewarding things, because not only was I able to see the curiosity, the excellence that these young boys of color have, and other students as well, but they were able to congregate together, share things, you know, act kind of in the way that they typically act at home. And then their, you know, their coaches were also similar to them, and their mentors were similar to them. And I think having shared that environment, it kind of makes me comfortable that it is possible, but it takes investment to provide that space for students that need it. And most of our school system probably doesn't operate like that.
Yeah, a couple things. Porter, I promise I'm going to pass it to you. I do want to go back. I also want to thank Ephraim for something he said earlier, because he took a really sympathetic view towards teachers having to balance so many different things. And so, you know, just thinking about the care that they were able to provide given the circumstances that they were in, and all the things that we ask of educators. And also, you know, this does make me think about, how do we create spaces in schools where Axel can have that Boost-like experience, where like his intellectual curiosity as a young male of color is affirmed in the school. And it's not necessarily, because one of the reasons why it is such a challenge for young boys to be in academically rigorous spaces is because those spaces usually don't look like them. So if you go in there, you're the only one in there, and you get otherized for not, you know, because you're being separated from the rest of your social group that actually could probably be in that group, that space with you, and be successful. And I also just want to say, just real quick on the code switching, you know, one of the things we want people to see with our Kings is that even if you haven't mastered this certain type of language that we often celebrate in schools, that doesn't mean that you aren't a genius. That doesn't mean you aren't a king. We may have some kings, but the ways in which they communicate may be different than what we're used to or what we're accustomed to. But that doesn't make them any less of a king. So I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A couple things. One of the things I like to say is, I want our Kings, and I think that people should go think about affecting their environment instead of allowing their environment to affect them. Right? And I think when we allow our environment to affect us, it consumes us, and we try to make sure we are satisfying our environment and those people who are around us, and sometimes lose ourselves and not realize or figure out, I need to try to figure, like you said earlier, how am I going to get up out of here? Communities swallow men of color or boys of color up, right? And you see it in our, no matter where you may be. You might know some people in Kinston who's still in Kinston, right? And they ain't came out of Kinston, and Kinston is all up inside of them. But another thing that Axel said also that I thought about was, on the basketball court, on the soccer field, on the football field, we root and we want to make sure that we're successful, right? And parents and uncles and cousins, they come and they watch, and they'll come to take you to a practice. But academically, we don't put the same push behind those things, because we feel as though that ball is going to get us further in academics. But what do you do when the ball goes flat? Right? Move us along. And you guys shared some of this earlier when you were talking about the teachers or the counselors and everyone who's affected you and showed you that they cared. I also want to welcome and they've been in the chat talking, Southwest Kings. They're in the building as well, as they are here. And I want to say, I think I've called out WG Pearson. WG Pearson Kings are here. So we do have a question from Eno Valley, and they're Kings. So I'm going to share their question before we get to ours. And it kind of goes back to code switching. And Ephraim, you brought it up, so we'll let you tackle this particular question. The question is, what is code switching? And why is it important?
Well, the simple definition is code switching is you changing your language or how you speak or even how you exist based on the environment. So for some of you who may be listening, maybe you live in a part of Durham, let's just say like McDougal Terrace, or you live in a part where it's kind of known as the hood, right? You exist in a certain way in that environment because you learn pretty early what's required of you. Well, that doesn't always translate, or I should say, as Dr. Kelvin said, you don't feel comfortable being how you would be at home in your space, say like at school or on a sports team. So you learn how to switch your language and adapt based on your environment. And so I would say why it's important is we're all motivated to survive, right? And so we all want to feel like we belong, right? And so Dr. Bullock, one of the things you said earlier about Axel's, the program that he was a part of, the STEM program, maybe brown boys wouldn't feel the impetus or feel they need to code switch if there were more people in those spaces that look like them where they could feel comfortable, right? But it is almost, there's so few spaces, not just in school, not just in the country, but in the world, where brown people can just be unmasked and be unfiltered and just exist, right? There are so few places where we don't have to put on so that we survive, right? And so we learn that so early that it's safer to speak a certain way if a police officer pulls over you, right? I can remember experience when I was 11 years old, stopped by two cops in the middle of the housing projects because I fit the description of some kids who set fire to some abandoned house, right? You just learn really quickly that it's safer to be one way than it is another, and you internalize that, right? And so it breaks my heart that we have to master that so early, but as we know, we learn that you survive when you can do that, right?
So Ephraim, that kind of leads us into our next question, right? So that's why I'm gonna go to you first on this particular question. As a man of color in America, what does it mean to be free? Right? And what are some things that need to happen so that boys and men of color experience true freedom?
Oh, that's a huge question. I think the
welcome to King's Conversations, brother.
We need it. Like, honestly, the experience, there's so much to unpack in our own personal lives, right? In our, shared experiences, that we need questions like this. And I think the first way I interpret it is really as an immigrant. And I think there may be many young boys of color who would maybe be children of immigrants. And the first way is that being in this country itself is almost a burden or captivity to who I am or who I become, right? There's different ways that oppression kind of operates, right? Sometimes it's through the color of your skin, how you look. Sometimes it's through a status. Sometimes it's through whatever earnings and income and where you live. And so my first thing is that, right? Kind of like this sense for me, in my experience, it's been status of, my parents kind of like trying to find somewhere to live and then being asked for that documentation, or for me, myself, like trying to see, oh, I should go to school. Oh, but I can't pay for it. Oh, because I can't get this, financial aid. Oh, it's because my status. So it's like, and even like not being able to leave this place and come back freely and move across boundaries and borders is something that essentially like kind of makes you feel unfree, right? Captive. And so that's how I interpret it. In terms of what it means to be free, I think the way I would characterize it is, I've been so fortunate to get, points along the road where someone's helped me, push me to get that boost, to make it to that next step. But I think a lot of people feel stuck. A lot of young boys feel stuck, and that this is it, right? Whatever they have, whatever's happening at home, whatever's happening at school, that's it. There's no changing. I work with high schoolers now. I've worked with middle schoolers, and I've worked with my sister, right? And a lot of times, when they get those progress reports, those cards, they just feel like, I can't do anything about it. And right, this sense of not feeling like you can do anything about it and that things just happen to you is the first thing that we probably need to continue tackling. And so I think additionally, I'm an older sibling. I know some of you may have siblings, have families. And a lot of times I think there's this like sense of responsibility that I have to, do something for them, or, if mom can't work or if someone else can't work, then I guess I have to take on that. In this pandemic, to be honest, a lot of the communities, a lot of the students that should be kind of getting their education, they've ended up working, right? And they've compromised a lot of their education that has been hard earned. And it's difficult now that they're either graduating or starting high school with like in a terrible situation. So let's see. I think a way that maybe we could help boys or men of color experience true freedom probably starts with not just believing that freedom or possibility or opportunity exists somewhere, right? You have to bring that to them, right? They have to be like sat in a space where they can like see, touch, feel that opportunity like right with them, which is why I give this example of Boost, right? Being able to sit down with the person beside you who says, look, I've made it. I've done this. And I haven't made it because I'm the exception, but I've made it because someone invested in me, and I can invest in yourself. I think that makes a true difference. So like to show them that ramp, to show them that like pathway is where you start breaking down these like, sometimes self-internalized notions that like there is no way out.
Yeah, thank you. Ephraim?
I think one of the things that you said, and I'm glad you asked this question because it brought back, but you said you teach your boys that you can have the mindset that your environment controls you, or that you actually have some influence over your environment. And the fact that you're telling them this now, I learned this until way later, right? And it's so true that for as much as my environment and my circumstances impress themselves upon me, I also have a will, and I also have ability, and I also have gifts that have been planted inside of me, and I can use those things to impress that upon my environment, right? So, like planting that seed of belief that actually I can change the energy around me just with the gifts and with the energy that I have, right? To be an activist or to be a good student or to impact my family, like Axel, you were saying, like your sister, right? Kids need to be able to believe that, right? So I think that's just the first thing. And then I think how I would define freedom, I think freedom is the ability to live life on your terms, right? And I think there is nothing more restrictive or captivating than someone being able to control whether your parent or you can pay your bills or put food in your belly, right? When you have to answer to someone for your most basic needs, you know that if there's a potential, if I disagree with my boss, I can be fired, and therefore I can't pay my bills, and therefore I can't feed my family. To me, that is the most like basic form of bondage, that we need to be in a place financially, whether that's through business ownership or those sorts of things, where we have a say and we express ourselves and exist in a way that feels authentic to us without fear that we're going to lose out on our most basic needs, or that we're going to end up, getting locked up or those sorts of things. So for me, it's just, you got to do something, whether that's a business or a job. You have to do something to where when you make a decision, someone doesn't have the ability to take away your livelihood for it, and you can still provide for yourself and family, right? At the most basic need,
Ephraim, I appreciate, both of you, the way you define freedom was just deep, very thought-provoking, and they actually lead very well into our next couple of questions, which are tailored for each of you. So Axel, as a student at Duke, you started Duke Define American, which was an advocacy group for undocumented students at the university. Tell us a little bit about your organization and why you co-founded it.
Yeah, so Duke Define American is kind of something that we started as an initiative to provide a space to develop and support and also organize other undocumented students. I received DACA in 2014, so it means I came to this country undocumented and eventually got that work authorization. But in 2017, that was essentially, that program was trying to get taken away by the previous administration. And I had actually started my advocacy in Riverside, right, through the help of teachers and other students who decided, like, hey, we're going to step up for students who were being threatened by deportation within our own high school, right? And so starting from that point, I think really what spurred my decision to start Define American is that I had already learned what it was to own my own story. I knew maybe I didn't have the status. I knew I maybe didn't have the age or the expertise, but I knew that I could stand up in front of a school board. I could stand up in front of a city council. I could stand up in front of a congressperson or in front of like detention officials to say, this is my story. You can't tell me otherwise. I know what it is and I know the power behind it, right? And so when we were trying to advocate for those students that were detained, learning that amazing kind of like lesson really empowered me to say when I was on campus at Duke is like, if we don't have a space for each other, if we don't have a way to build power and organize amongst each other here, we can create one, right? We aren't, bound by the, labels or the groups or things that exist already. We can develop those ourselves. And so that's what we did. That's what we started. It's kind of taken its own course now, but my goal was to develop a leadership where other students who maybe had never had the experience that I had in high school of using their voice, of telling their stories, of being free of the fear or of the fear that they had to come out based on their status, could like take that initiative, take that first step. And it all started in the Durham Bull Plaza where we had already thought about this, but that day that the decision was announced, many of us went. And honestly, I think there was first 2 people that were feeling brave enough, courage enough to speak. And then after that first person went, there was one after the other, after the other, after the other. And like when you get that momentum, when someone first steps up, that is powerful. And so like that's what the type of organizing we try to do when we started Duke Define American. And you know, that's the history of Durham, to be honest, people organizing. And so I'm proud to have helped with that.
I appreciate it. That's deep. That's deep. That's deep. And to Ephraim, so there are quite a few boys of color, even now, adults that are listening, be able to own their own business. I know you kind of came through the ranks with your pie, but what advice do you have for young entrepreneurs that are still in school, and as well as adults who are listening, who want to be entrepreneurs?
Man, there's so many directions to go with this one, but I think first for the younger members of our audience, I think it's important that you try things. You know, some of the side hustles that I did before starting Your Pie, it was because I just tried things, right? Like I taught myself photography because I just picked up a camera one day and I liked doing it, but then that became a nice little side hustle for me, right? And I think when you're younger, it's important to not get so tunnel vision on one thing or locked into what you think you're going to be. And so I think trying things will really open up your mind and help you to start to see the possibilities of what you can do. And then the other thing about entrepreneurship is, you know, everybody makes it this big grand idea, but for younger people, all you're doing as an entrepreneur is solving a problem that someone has, right? If there's a problem, you make a business to solve it, right? So, you know, if it's 100 degrees in the summer and, you know, people are hot outside and you go buy lemonade, you can sell that for more than you pay for it. And people are going to buy it because they're thirsty and it's 100 degrees outside, right? And so, you know, for the older people, one of the things is that entrepreneurship just takes courage. You know, I know sometimes everyone's like, man, you know, you have multiple stores and you're doing a good job, but man, imposter syndrome is so real to where, you know, when you know, self-doubt is really easy to creep in. It's, you know, easy to stay comfortable if that thing is really in your heart and you want to own your own business and you want to try to build wealth. It's easy to stay where you are because you know that it's consistent. You know what that paycheck's going to look like every 2 weeks. Whereas entrepreneurship is not quite like that. When you run your own business, I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes you don't get a salary because you pay the people you're responsible for, and sometimes there's not enough left for you. And so also I would say, you know, sometimes you have to make those sacrifices because you're building something you believe in. And so, you know, I think if you want to start your own business, be clear why. If you're doing it just because it's cool to say I'm a business owner, that won't get you through the tough times because inevitably you're going to make mistakes. Something like COVID's going to happen and it's rocking the world. So be clear why you want to do it, because entrepreneurship truly is ownership. And what ownership means is that even when other people can't show up or don't show up or won't show up, if you're the owner, you have to, right? And that's what it means to truly take responsibility for something, that when everyone else backs out, you're committed to this thing, both with your heart, both in your mind, and also financially, right? So that would be just a piece of advice. If you want to start your business, be sure why. And then after that, trust yourself, take the risk. It never hurts to fail. I have 3 ideas that have failed, that didn't do it, but you got to keep trying, right?
Yeah. I appreciate you for letting me if I was cutting you off.
No, you're fine.
I've heard a speaker say before and it was very unpopular at the time. I hope you fail.
Yeah.
Right. And saying, I hope you fail but you'll be in good company.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go through the list of how Oprah failed, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't think that she would be great. But look at her now, right? So you talk about Michael Jordan, who didn't make varsity basketball team. But look at her. I hope he failed. Look at Ephraim Yates, the guy who had two things, the other things didn't fail, but he owns a Your Pie. Look at Axel, and you look at the things he's gone through to see where he is today. So I think failing, we have to let our students know that failing is okay, but we need to make sure when we fail forward.
Yeah.
Right? And we push them to want to be great. So one thing I want to share with everyone who's watching us on Facebook and on YouTube, if you have any questions at all, please make sure that you put them in the comment section. You're more than welcome to ask a question. I believe I do have another question from DeWarren Langley, and that question is, how do you determine if your business is not working?
Well, that's probably one of the easiest things, right? Because usually sales let you know pretty quickly if the business isn't working, like if you're not. But in fairness, it's not on sales isn't the only litmus test for if your business is doing well, right? Because if you're making the impact that you want to make, there are companies who go 5 years before they ever turn to profit, right? Because they're reinvesting all of that, or they're spending that money on infrastructure or building things that are going to make the business successful over the long term. Or rather than pocketing that money, they're hiring great people to make the business work, right? So you can't just look at profits. You really have to, define success, really, because what if you're running as a nonprofit? Or what if, like We Are Kings, I don't know if you guys are LLC or a nonprofit or what that entity looks like, but the way that you're measuring success probably is dollar and cents, but I guarantee you have some metrics that you are measuring in terms of, I'm looking at this kid, and over the 5 years he's been in this program, he came in as a shy kid. He came in and maybe he had, attitude because of his home environment. And by the time he's graduated high school, this kid maybe has a full ride to college. His personality is completely transformed. He's confident and he's mentoring other kids, right? I would imagine that is a measure of success, right? So it really depends on the business that you're running and the organization that you have too,
Thank you. Dr. Bullock, you look like you wanted to say something there. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, well, I mean, one, I'm still thinking about the notion that y'all were talking about as far as failing, and thinking about all the times I failed in my life, or literally fail, or
right.
Just something didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, and it just makes me think about so often. People look at us, and when we're experiencing these successes, people might be getting awards or being named to this position or that position. It's like, oh man, look at, and it was a graphic I saw one time about, it showed like what people think success looks like. And it was like this straight line towards success. And it's like what success really looks like. And it was like all over the place. And, because there are so many challenges that people have to work through to get to where they're trying to go. And in thinking about that, our next question was like, as you look back over your life and the different experiences you've had, y'all have spoke about a number of these. What would you say is probably the one thing that helped change the trajectory of your life, or set your life in the current trajectory that it's on? So if there was one experience, or however you want to take that, one thing that shifted the trajectory.
I have a kind of easy one.
Okay.
But I have an interpretation of it that has helped me come into this country, like easy. The fact that I came when I was 7 years old, and that doesn't determine your success, but that's determined how I see myself, how I see my purpose, And one example is I speak to my grandmother a lot. She's still in Honduras. And when I was thinking of this conversation, I think my conversations with her came to mind a lot because she frequently talks about the mentality that I have or that she thinks I have, and the mentality that my cousin's still in Honduras or the family that I still have. Honduras is a very difficult place. If we talk about violence, if we talk about poverty, if we talk about natural disasters, a lot of those things are experienced there. But I think one of the probably worst epidemics is the kind of sense of like just distress and what we're talking about, failure, right? Kind of being stuck. And so she always tells me that, oh, you have this mentality, and it's like, it's because you're over there. And not necessarily, right? I think I was lucky to get here in many ways. I think I was blessed by the efforts of my family to make the effort to get me here, to make the effort to support me through here. And so why I think that's important is because it doesn't determine my success. There are many immigrants that come here and are still struggling, are exploited. But coming here and experience that allowed me to investigate my own history, right? My own personal history. There's a history of movements that we need to learn, history of progress that we need to learn in terms of civil rights, in terms of like rights in many different sense. But your own family's history, right? What my parents taught me of what they experienced when they were growing up, of the sacrifices they made, the stories and the history of my grandmother in Honduras continues to inform who I want to be and what purpose I have, right? And so like that's the moment it starts, but that's kind of more of, that's where my learning started, right? In terms of what I wanted to do. And so that's one that I would share.
Thank you. Ephraim, what about for you?
Yeah, I think there are, as we kind of alluded to earlier, we really don't think about this. We really are the sum of all these sort of micro moments, right? Like everything that has happened has contributed to each of us being on this call tonight, right? And, there are moments that, are particularly traumatic for me, things that I don't like to think about that have been transformative for me, but were needed, right, for character building. There are positive experiences, for example, when I finished college, I moved 1,000 miles away to the state of Texas, right? I didn't have a single family member there. But the reason, so that was very transformative for me in terms of the career path and trajectory it set me on, in terms of like being able to earn a comfortable salary and take care of myself, right? And also having to super swim, because when you don't have family and you are your backup, you think a little bit different, right? And so but I think that's an important for all young men to have to go through, right? There has to come a point where you have to decide who you're going to be, and something has to test your mettle or test you, and you have to see how you're going to come out of it. And you may fail, like you said, Jermaine. You may fall and not get it right, but the key is that you get back up, right? And that you keep learning. And I always think I've learned way more from my heartaches and failures and disappointments than the mountaintop experiences. They feel great, and you love the rush of energy and happiness that you get from them. But man, there's a quote that says like, life is the toughest teacher, because she gives you the test first and the lesson after. So life, like, you got to go through it. You have to hurt, and then you're like, oh, now I see, right? And so I think that's probably just one moment, is being on my own, having to kind of really figure it out. But there's just so many, man, that have shaped who I am right now, from mentors to my parents, my mom. I can go on and on.
So, gentlemen, I want to respect your time. We have 3 minutes, so there is a question. I'm gonna take the first one that came in the chat, and if you can just answer this as quick as possible. Are you satisfied where you are today, or are you comfortable?
I'm grateful. I think me being the competitive person I am, the ambition I am, it's hard to say I'm satisfied. Like, I always want to do more, but I also, through my wife, my 6-year-old. I've become so much better at just being present in the moment and really. So I think for me, yeah, I'm grateful where I am. I'm thankful, but of course, I always want to do better because that's just in our nature, right? We're always striving, but I'm grateful. I'm thankful.
I would say, just real quick, I'm still young professional starting. I feel great. I'm learning. I see my success as displacement, right? I know where I started. I know where my family started, and I know what I've accomplished despite the obstacles, right? And I think that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, gentlemen. So here's the last question I want to ask you guys. And we like to ask this every time we are with someone. If you could tell your elementary, middle, or high school self something right now, what would you say and why? You tell your elementary, middle, or high school, you can choose. What would you say and why?
Axel, you go first. You're closer. You're closer.
It hasn't been that long.
I gotta think.
Well, I'm working with high schoolers, so I'll go with that. Oh my gosh, it's been so difficult to get some of these high schools to feel that there's a way out of this. There's a time after this pandemic. So what I would say based on that recent experience is like, you have to push yourself to seek every opportunity. People have mentioned it here. That includes failing at certain times. So leave no stone unturned. And most of all, because this is something that I've been trying so much, accept help when it is offered to you.
Yes.
I think a lot of times we're kind of accustomed to like, I'll just wear it out. It'll happen. It'll happen to me. I'll get through it. But then like sometimes there's a hand, outstretched and asking you, how can I support you? How can I help you? And really, I think that requires a mentality that like you have to consider that what you're doing isn't just school, or what you're doing isn't just like, maybe a part-time job. It's got to be like seen as an investment in yourself, like 5 to 10 years from now. And so when we're young at this age, right, we don't think in those terms, right? For me, I was thinking maybe I'll get to college, maybe that's it. But then like you get there and you're like, oh, what do I do now? Right? So you have to try to push yourself. When your family lives paycheck to paycheck, you don't sometimes have the luxury of actually thinking of a month, 2, 3 years ahead, right? But we need to try, and there's people like us who have maybe made it to some level of achievement that can help with that. And then the last thing I'll say is like, your education is not, the goal of it is not to pass a test, right? The goal of your education is to develop a human being, right? Who you are as a human being. So that does not stop after you leave the classroom. You can learn in so many different ways beyond what the classroom is.
Thank you.
If I had to give a piece of advice, I would tell myself, and just believing that there are young men who are exactly where I was. I would trust yourself, trust that drumbeat that you feel, right? There's something that you think you could possibly be great at. There is something that you already have a love for. And sometimes what will happen, I like to say, like, don't let people trick you out of your spot. Because sometimes you will like say dream that you have, and someone will tell you that's not practical, or no, I want to pick this. And the one thing I would tell that kid is like, that drum beat was actually right. Like, I can remember being very young, wanting to like own my own business, and I always knew I would be someone that would be able to help financially provide for my family. That drum beat was right. It may have took that winding illustration of success there, but that initial instinct that was placed on my heart that the universe gave me, that seed was powerful and it's grown. So whether you're in first grade, whether you're in middle school, or whether you're a high school senior on the precipice of going to college, listen to that voice and trust it. And if anything, lean into it and cultivate it and let that drum beat grow louder. Because the more you feed it and give it energy, it actually just becomes stronger and it crystallizes. And that will probably be the thing, that can be one of the things that changes your life, and it changes the environment around you. So, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Bullock.
Well, guys, we have truly appreciated, or we appreciate all the knowledge, all the jewels, all the gems that y'all have shared this evening with our young men in our We Are Kings programs. I wish we could keep this conversation going for a while. Hey, I wish we could be in person to talk. One day, maybe we can be in a room together to discuss some of these things. But I just, on behalf of the Office of Equity Affairs, just want to thank you all. I want to thank our We Are Kings programs that have joined us. I want to thank everybody that's joined us this evening. I think we have some parents and just people connected to us on this call. So just want to thank everyone for being here. And again, shouting out some of those Kings programs. I know we're here: W.G. Pearson, Southwest, Eno Valley, Riverside. I'm probably missing some, but thank you all for being here, for joining us. And just, I know you all were blessed by just the knowledge and the advice that was shared here this evening. So we will be doing this again on March 18th. That is our next installment of Kings Conversations. We'll be sharing more information about that in the weeks to come. Mr. Porter, anything else before we close out?
I just want to thank every single person for getting on the call today. Please make sure you share. Please make sure you post. These men of color have so much knowledge that should not be confined to just those people who were able to be live tonight. We want to make sure that we share it. It's on Facebook Live. It's also on YouTube. Thank you guys so much for everyone who participated, all your kind words in the chat. Yes, we are Kings. Thank you guys so much.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Watts is in here too. Watts, We Are Kings program. Want to shout them out before we close.
All right. Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, take care.